Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for Safe Shores 2024 Child Abuse Prevention Month webinar, The Building Blocks of Childhood, Key Lessons for Grown-ups. We're so glad you're here. I'm Michelle Booth-Cole, Executive Director of Safe Shores, the DC Children's Advocacy Center, and today's moderator. Behind the scenes and in control of the entire tech situation, graphics, promotions, and so much more in making today happen are my colleagues, Safe Shores Outstanding Communications Team, Micah Gowdy and Whitney Baum. Thank you both to infinity and beyond. It's been a lot of work. I also want to acknowledge the rest of Safe Shores' superb staff and our dedicated board of directors, because people make this work happen. Here's the agenda for our time together this afternoon. We'll start with some background about Safe Shores and today's webinar. Next, I'll introduce our excellent panelists, after which they will share their insights in response to my questions until about 1 o'clock. We'll take a 3-minute break, and then when we return, the panelists will respond to some of our audience questions that you're going to put in the chat, in the Q&A feature. So please share your questions for the panelists starting now. Use the Q&A button on your Zoom toolbar to submit questions. And feel free to continue to submit questions throughout the webinar. We will try to get to as many of them as we can. Now for a little bit of background about Safe Shores. As this Children's Advocacy Center for the District of Columbia, Safe Shores implements the nationally replicated Child Advocacy Center, CAC, model. We're a 501c3 local nonprofit organization, and we work in partnership with public and private agencies. And together we provide comprehensive, coordinated, and specialized services to child victims of physical and sexual abuse and their families in response to allegations of child abuse. In addition to making sure investigations are child-centered, our work also includes wraparound services and support for child victims up through age 17. And we help their families on the road to healing by providing advocacy and mental health support services, all at no cost. Safe Shores is also home to the DC chapter of Prevent Child Abuse America. As part of our community engagement activities this April, which is Child Abuse Prevention Month, we're hosting today's webinar. For more information about Safe Shores, including signing up to take a tour of our mission and/or trainings we're offering this month and beyond, please visit safeshores.org and follow us on Instagram and LinkedIn at Safe Shores DC. So what's the why behind today's webinar? At Safe Shores, nearly 30 years of experience working with child victims of abuse and their caregivers have taught us that being intentional about protecting children and caring for children requires an all-hands-on-deck community approach. After all, protecting kids is everybody's business. Since children don't come with their own instruction manuals, and we live in such a chaotic world where information comes at us at a fire hose pace, we have to be intentional about prioritizing children. That means slowing down for kids, from the littlest ones to our teenagers, and spending quality time away from screens to play, listen, teach, and give them the attention and focus they need and deserve. Prioritizing children also means learning the facts about child development and what it takes to protect children. Finally, prioritizing children requires adults to manage ourselves well, our reactions to and interactions with kids, so that we can be safe adults and show up for kids consistently with love, knowledge, patience, and insight. Safe Shores is working hard to help more adults know the facts about child development and child protection. The more that adults know and understand children, their behaviors, and their essential needs, the better we can do individually and collectively to help all kids thrive. That's why it means so much that you are with us today. You've made time to prioritize kids in your learning today. And this is another reminder that if you have questions for the panelists, please use the Q&A button on your Zoom toolbar and submit them. Of course, please take care of yourself during this webinar. Stay hydrated, stretch, be intentional about your breathing, be well on purpose. Now, I'm delighted to introduce today's panelist. First, I'll read just a bit of their respective bios, and then each panelist will supplement that by sharing a bit more about herself. Then we'll start the questions and information sharing. So please note that with the panelists' consent, I'll be using their first names today because this is a conversation. And we're going to start with Cindi Gibbs-Wilborn. Since 2018, Cindi Gibbs-Wilborn has served as the head of Beauvoir, the National Cathedral Elementary School in Washington, D.C. Prior to Beauvoir, Cindi spent 5 years as head of Hanahau'oli School, a progressive school in Honolulu, Hawaii. There, she, give me a moment, my technology's acting up a little bit, spearheaded curriculum, review, and revision, continuum-based student progress reports, and faculty evaluations rooted in growth and flexibility. Cindi, tell us a little bit more about what you want our audience to know about you today.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much, Michelle, for having me join this very important conversation. As mentioned in the opening welcome, I do wear many hats, and that said, I feel blessed to be both a head of school, a wife, and a parent, although honestly, it really depends on the time of day or the circumstances. And let's be real with each other, each of those jobs can be hard. So while I professionally serve as a head of school, my husband and I are also the parents of twin teenagers, Tyler and Evie, although actually we can only claim that we're a teenager for about 4 more months because they are about to reach their 18th birthday. And I first became interested in Safe Shores for personal reasons. You see, my husband and I adopted our twins through the foster care system in North Carolina, where we used to live. And when our children were 3, we were unexpectedly linked to an organization similar to Safe Shores as a result of prior experiences in their birth home. And honestly, had it not been for the resources provided to us during this period, I'm not sure where we would be today. But to this day, we have just remained staunch advocates for organizations such as Safe Shores, who are in the business of protecting children and elevating their voices, because it literally saved their lives. In addition, Safe Shores has been a remarkable resource to Beauvoir over the years by providing training to our faculty and staff around child sexual abuse awareness, our responsibility as mandated reporters, and adult-centered education. For we all know that as skilled adults as we may be, as educators, parents, or whatever our vocations may be, knowing what to look for and how to respond are crucial to the well-being of our children. So thank you so much, Michelle and Safe Shores, for being that resource.
Thank you, Cindi, for sharing that, for sharing a piece of yourself. And we look forward to what you're going to share when we get to the Q&A. Next, we have Taiya Gregory. Taiya Harvey Gregory said yes to the social work profession almost 30 years ago. She joyfully serves as program manager with the District of Columbia Public Schools School Mental Health Program, supporting elementary school-based social workers. And she's passionate about the profession. She has served as an adjunct professor in Bowie State University's social work program for nearly 15 years. Welcome, Taiya. And what else would you like our audience to know about you today?
That mute button gets me every time, you all. But similar to Cindi, in addition to the work that I do professionally, I am a wife of almost 30 years. I married my husband almost 30 years ago. So I said yes to him almost 30 years ago too. And I have 2 adult children. And so they call it adulting now. I call it parenting 2.0. Okay. Very, very similar to Cindi, Safe Shores has really been a wonderful partner to DC Public Schools. Our social workers often contact them for issues or situations that have presented in the schools that require support from the experts at Safe Shores. Additionally, Safe Shores last school year partnered with our school our schools and our social workers to provide a series of trainings. And we had actually 2 cohorts where we did the stewards of children, and I think the building blocks of healthy relationships, or I can't think of the exact name of it. But it was about 3 different courses that our clinicians and our CBO partners attended. And although we are trained as mandated reporters, it is always refreshing to get a reminder of what it looks like for people to what it looks like to experience child sexual abuse and the importance of their roles as clinicians in supporting children. And so I'm really excited to be here as well. And I thank you, Michelle, for the opportunity.
Well, thank you for being with us. And now, Dr. Maria Trent. Dr. Trent is a professor of pediatrics, American health, and nursing at Johns Hopkins University. She's director of the Division of Adolescent Young Adult Medicine and Senior Associate Dean of Diversity and Inclusive Excellence at the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. She's a Bloomberg Endowed Professor of American Health and an independent research scientist. And with that, Maria, tell us a little bit more about what you would like our audience to know about you today.
Sure, it's really wonderful to be here with all of you today and with this esteemed panel of folks to really have a discussion. I will share that I really started my career in Washington, D.C. As a resident at Children's Hospital. And while there, one of my first jobs on the side was that I did DHS physicals for children who were entering the foster care system acutely. And so I'm very thoughtful about that experience. In terms of it being one that has sort of shaped my trajectory. And then for many years, I served as the director of our physician services program for the Baltimore City Health Department, caring for young people in 5 of Baltimore's largest schools as a part of a school-based health center. So in addition to sort of clinical experience in the hospital, I think it's some of the community experiences that have shaped my views. The final thing is that I'm a widow, and I'm the parent of 2 amazing young people, 16 and 19. And I think I understand I understand grief very differently now than I probably did 4 years ago. And what it's like to shift from having another person who's parenting with you to having to make all the decisions. And so I think as both a clinician and a parent, I think that I've probably changed a lot in the last 4 years. And so I think it brings new insight and things that I can bring to my patients and families that I work with here, and ways that I write and do research moving forward into the future.
Thank you for that, Maria. And we're delighted you're here with us. And since everybody's mentioning their mom status, people who know me, I have 3 fantastic daughters. So I'm going to bring that perspective today. We're going to jump into our questions now. And the first one, we're going to start with Cindi, because you're at that early childhood development stage of life in terms of who you serve. So what are some key developmental milestones that parents should be aware of in the early years of a child's life?
Thank you. Sure. Happy to answer that one. So if I asked you for a minute to think about the number of times, if you're a parent or a caregiver, when your child does something frustrating or upsetting or embarrassing, what number would you come up with? 5, 10, 100, too many to count? For example, what about your 4-year-old who might belt out a question at 100 decibels during a quiet, reflective prayer at your place of worship? Happen to anyone out there? I will acknowledge that it has. Or how about this one? Your 5-year-old who has major meltdowns every single time they can't get their Thomas the Tank train engine to stay on the track as it rounds that curve. Anyone relate to that? Anyone ever worry that your child's criminal tendencies of stealing cookies out of the cookie jar are going to lead into incarceration in the next 20 years? Or how about those with 10 to 12-year-olds? Do you ever worry that those disrespectful eye rolls are going to last forever? I bet I can see a lot of heads nodding out there, and I'm here to tell you as an educator and a parent that for the most part, you have no need to fear. Children at various ages and stages are doing exactly what their body is programmed to do: test boundaries, assert their independence, develop self-regulation skills, and grow up into well-rounded citizens of the world. Now, just because these behaviors are developmentally appropriate doesn't mean that we should ignore them. In fact, I would argue that it is our right and our responsibility as parents and caregivers to guide them through what educators like to call teachable moments, allowing these children to learn from mistakes, practice new behaviors, and turn them into what I like to call helpful habits. So instead of whining at 3, we want to help our toddlers practice using their voice. Instead of leaving their house with their underwear on backwards at 4 or 5, I know some of you have been there as well, we want to help them pay more attention to grooming as they get older. See, all of these things can be taught and modeled for children, but the most important thing to remember is that these stages are expected, they're normal, and you're not alone. So I'd like to pause here for a minute to do a little exercise with this group, if you will. And you're going to be asked to use your chat box next to respond. And I'm going to ask if, there we go. We have a screen that's shown up. So each of the following behaviors that I'm about to share have been identified by researchers to be developmentally appropriate at a certain age and stage in a child's life. Please keep in mind, as I say that individual development is never, ever scripted or goes in the exact order that we think it will. Trust me, there are many surprises, but there are general patterns of development that we tend to see. So that said, look at the following 6 behavioral attributes that have been strongly associated with various ages during childhood. And I want you to see if you can assign the correct age to the appropriate behavior. The 6 developmental years that we'll be focused on for this activity, I'll give you a hint, are ages 4 to 9, with one of those 6 years associated with one of those behaviors. So what I'm going to do is read each behavior individually, and then I want you to enter the age in the chat box that you think would most commonly, we would most commonly observe this behavior. And then we're going to look at each one and discuss what it actually means for us as parents and caregivers as we understand young children. So the first one, and I'm going to put my readers on here so I can actually see it. At what age do you think that children tend to be noisy, sloppy, and in a hurry? Keep in mind 4 through 9. What age do you think they tend to be noisy, sloppy, and in a hurry? Just drop it in the chat box. Okay. The second behavior, ages 4 through 9 again, what age do you think you begin to see children exhibiting a strong sense of fairness or justice? That just isn't right, but that wasn't fair. When have you heard those words before? And what age resonates with you the most? The third behavior, at which age do you generally see children being able to work in groups, but there's lots of arguing involved? Just hard to get along. Love being together, but hard getting along. And you can't say adulthood. Okay. The next behavior, we'll let you drop those in, but be thinking about this one. At what age do you think you tend to see children engaging more in testing boundaries and adult authority? I'm not able to see the chat box right now. Michelle, I'm going to ask you to help me, but I'd ask that our participants this morning also look and notice what other attendees are putting in.
I see 5, I see 8, I see 4, I see 12.
Great. Second to last behavior. At which age do children tend to seek attachment and approval usually from adults? They just have to get it right. So asking a child, 8, yep, asking a child to, figure it out on their own might lead to frustration, but I need you to tell me how to get it right. And then the last one, 10, you saw?
10 and 6.
Last one is, at what age can children become very moody or touchy?
Before any age. Somebody wrote
That's true.
5, 9.
That's great.
Lots of 9s coming up.
Well, the good news with all of these behaviors actually is that they can happen at any age. Again, it's not just specific to age 4, age 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Oh, I love the results here. Thank you. They can happen at any age. It just means that researchers tend to see, in general, an increase in these kind of behaviors around a certain age. So I'm going to give you the answers. The age in which you see children tending to be noisy, sloppy, and in a hurry is around 4 years. Think about how many mouths you wipe, crumbs you pick up. Ready to move on to the next thing. The age in which you see children exhibiting a strong sense of fairness or justice is around 8 years of age. The age in which children can work in groups, but with lots of arguing, is 9 years. The age in which children may engage in testing more boundaries and adult authority is around the 6-year range. Some of you may have already moved through it and remember it. Some of you may be approaching it. Children seek attachment and approval, that getting it right stage, at 5 years of age. And then the moody and touchy period is at 7 years.
So Cindi, I'm gonna jump in so we can go to Taiya, because we have so many questions we want to get to, but I know you can weave this into another question we pull up later.
Perfect.
Thank you for that. That was really helpful. I wish I'd had it when my kids were little, but it was really helpful. Taiya, talk to us about some of the most crucial elements for developing strong mental health and wellness in children.
I'm going to point out 3 areas. There are many more, but I'm going to point out about 3 of them. One is emotional support, and I'll elaborate in a minute. Healthy relationships and teaching children coping skills. When you talk about emotional support, children really do need supportive environments where they feel loved, they feel valued, and they feel accepted. And so loving, while we know that love is an emotion, we also know that love, especially for all of us, really, it looks like something. And it looks like teaching, it looks like children being able to fail, without fear. It looks like being able to be accepted. When you think about value, it often isn't what you wear on the outside. Value means that I feel seen, I feel heard, I feel cared for. When we think about the first stage of development, which is infancy, the first kind of tension that children experience is trust versus mistrust. And that trust says that I have a reliable person who can meet my needs, whether I cry, whether I need my diaper changed, whether I just need to be held. And so that doesn't stop at infancy. It really is the foundation. So just having feeling loved, valued, and accepted. Also, when we talk about health relationships, we have a lot of relationships, but when we look at those relationships, are they healthy ones? Are your children connected with not just you, but with maybe caregivers or family members or other significant adults that can contribute to a child's emotional stability? That can be at school, that can be at church. That can be with your football team, your tennis team, or the art team, but it's building a community where children can feel safe and they can feel valued and they can experience a level of security. Also, teaching coping skills. We aren't born with coping skills. I think Cindi talked about some of those behaviors, and those are demonstrations of an inability to cope. But we need those coping skills. We need to, again, like I said, be able to fail without fear. We need to be able to say, hey, I always used to tell my children, hey, it may be hard, but it's not impossible. Or, sometimes I say, well, they say it's not fair. And I'd say, well, sometimes things are just not fair, but what can we do about it now? And so it is this idea that you can persevere through a difficult time and be okay with the world. And so I think those are really like the essential building blocks. And all of that really starts at home. Schools can teach those things, but it is best if it happens at home or happens in a place that is much more organic. So I would say like those, I'm sorry, you all, those are really kind of the three essentials of kind of the foundation of mental wellness. And the truth is, and I'll say it again and again, it doesn't just happen at one stage. It happens at every single stage of development. It happens with us. You know what I mean? We have to experience all of those things in order to be successful. And so children are no different. And it is much more important, particularly because so many things happen during those, so much growth happens during those first 18 years of life. That parents and caregivers and family, you really have to dig in. It is a work. It is what I call a labor of love because it requires something of you.
Okay, so let's move up the age spectrum a little bit. Maria, many adults are easily frustrated by typical teen behavior, like risk-taking, boundary pushing, questioning, resistance to authority. What is it important for adults to know and understand about these aspects of adolescent behavior? And what advice do you offer parents and caregivers about how to respond to and talk with adolescents about risk-taking?
Sure. So, it's interesting. I think people talk a lot about the irritability that adolescents can experience. I don't think people realize how wonderful and beautiful this process is for them. So much changes. During no other time does an individual change more than the first year of life, right? Than during adolescence. They have this responsibility to change biologically, to have secondary sexual characteristics, and to emerge as a fully grown, their height adult. They also have to develop all of these other, build relationships with people, have their sense of identity be developed, and then change, and their relationships with different people in their lives change. It's very parent focused in the younger stages, then it's very peer focused, and then they can even move away from the peers and have like a significant relationship with one person that's a little more romantic while maintaining peer relationships. But it's interesting, a lot of parents talk about how then their young adult comes back. They realize, now my mom is a cool person to talk to about this, and they'll come back and the relationship transforms. And that all of that is really natural and beautiful, even though it doesn't feel good all the time. The same way it didn't feel good when your kid threw a tantrum or talked about a word. I can think about how all of those early milestones feed into what the adolescent experience could be like, and I think that parents have to prepare themselves. So they also have to be conscious of their own, talking about good mental health and emotional stability. It's, we have to monitor ourselves and how we respond to adolescent behavior. An adolescent says something that's a little jarring, in the car ride. Is your response to push that down or to create an argument? Or do you sit back and listen? Do you just drive the car sometimes and let the adolescent talk? Do you allow them to process it themselves and come to some decisions? Yeah, the data show that adolescents really do. They're listening to their parents the same way small kids are listening. They're listening to their parents. When we look at, for example, sexual behavior, parents who have taken the time to talk to adolescents about sex and talk to them about what their expectations are for their adolescent, to talk to them about their expectations about how dating, what that looks like, they tend to follow that trajectory. Oftentimes they tend to delay, if that's what the parent talks to them about, they delay sexual intercourse. And when they do have sex, they're more likely to be in relationships that matter. They're more likely to be able to communicate about their needs in those relationships, and they're more likely to use condoms. And so there's this whole notion around how a parent sets it up for their teenagers. So I would just say the setup is important. The setup probably begins when their adolescent is, I don't know, 5 or 6 as a great example. There's a book that I read to my daughter first. It was called Where Did I Come From? Because my husband and I, we could not put her on the school bus without knowing her boundaries, that she was going to be a safe person who could touch her, who could talk to her, right? But she also had to understand her own body and context. And so we read this book to her. Sure, she went around saying vagina for weeks, this whole embarrassing thing, that Cindy talked about for weeks. But then that book stayed on the shelf. It didn't go away. Over time, she would go back to the book and look up stuff. There's another follow-up book, what's happening to me. She could look and see and understand how she should be changing, what she should expect. But we set up the expectation that this was not closed information, so that when she needs it, she can go look, and it's not embarrassing. You come and talk to me about it. You need help with something in adolescence, then I'm a safe person for that. So the setup is important. Then they're going to do stuff that you don't agree with. They're going to take risks. And so I also ask parents to take a step back when we think about risks. There are risks that are healthy and there are risks that are not healthy, right? People take healthy risks all the time. Okay, parents take risks too, get in cars with a kid who's never driven one and we teach them how to drive. That's a risk that we're taking. But when you think about it, imagine the enormity of responsibility when that kid sits in that seat, knowing that's the only family car and that you've got to figure out how to do this right, having just been to an online class about the rules. That's a huge risk for a kid. And so how we approach young people when they're in these moments of growth and crisis really can be transformative. And I think that that's the thing we have to remember. Now, they can be mouthy and they don't always do what you want. I will also say, in the moments where young people may feel disrespectful, that sometimes that's a sign, especially if they're usually respectful, that's a time when they're struggling with something. There's uncertainty, or they feel judged by an adult or a parent. Like, you're not listening to me, you're just judging me. So I think I would just say that my advice is, before you say something, listen first, observe first. Create scenarios where they can be successful. For me, the example is this book on the shelf. So as you go through puberty, you have questions. You can read that for yourself and then come and ask me questions whenever you want. That I may hold on the side in the car while you're driving, but I'm still getting in there with you every day and riding with you to school, and the only car we have. Those are the things, and I'm trusting you because I love my car. I'm trusting you to do a good job. And so I think that it's those things that really put yourself in there with your young person.
Okay, I'm gonna jump in.
I hope that's helpful.
Yes, that was super helpful. Thank you for that. Since we have 2 educators, well, we have 3 educators, but 2 at the younger level with us today. Cindi and Taiya, this question's for you. Cindi, I'm gonna let you start and then Taiya can pick up. But what should parents and caregivers advocate for more of in schools to promote child well-being? And what should schools do less of or eliminate because it's not beneficial to children? Cindi, take 60 seconds if you can, and then Taiya will get to you. First, more of what?
Thank you. I'm going to make this short and sweet because there's an easy answer to it, in my opinion. If parents and caregivers would advocate more for free play and recess time and outdoor experiences for young children, and less of removing recess, limiting recess in schools, not providing children with opportunities to play outdoors, I think we'd all have healthier children as a result. We know as adults that children need outdoor experiences in order to learn how to socialize with one another, problem solve, think critically about the world around them, learn about nature, grow their gross motor skills. All of those things are essential. And if children aren't getting those outdoors, they are less available for learning indoors.
Thank you for that. Taiya, what do you think? What should parents and caregivers advocate for more of in schools to promote children's well-being? Are you muted?
There I am again. I told you all, that is my Achilles.
You're not alone. You're not
But
alone.
for me, I think it's really good to see that home to school connection. So I think many more opportunities for parents to be involved in what children are doing in school. So many times there's this periphery where parents, they may sign the permission slip, but just advocating for more involvement, more opportunities for parents really to, I would say, participate in the learning of their children. But also, in addition to that, when we're talking about children themselves, absolutely. I think free play, absolutely. I think opportunities to go on field trips and things of that nature. Some of the greatest experiences don't happen in the classroom. It is really when you can connect what happens in the classroom, what is actually happening in the real world. And so particularly, I think when you're talking about, I heard you talking about, when you were talking about adolescents, really, they have to feel this idea that there is purpose, that there's value, that they have skills. So I think I think just providing I would say structured, but even sometimes unstructured opportunities really for skill development, to find their strengths. Who can read the morning announcements? I used to, when I was in school, I would host the morning announcements, and I did not care if you could barely, if you had the basic skills, we were going to give you an opportunity. So giving children an opportunity, not because they have the skill, but because they have the desire to do things. Yeah.
Right. Thank you. And there was no Zoom mute when you were doing those announcements then.
No mute, right?
Yeah.
Maybe the occasional unclick of the button, but no mute. Yes.
Maria, what is important for policymakers to know about adolescents as they attempt to address what some refer to as juvenile delinquency or even truancy, missing school? What do policymakers need to know about kids so that they do a thoughtful job creating solutions?
Sure. I think that the punitive aspect of the purely punitive approach does not, and maybe some of my colleagues can also speak to this as well, certainly from a truancy perspective. So punishing a person because they're not there by making it so that they're suspended and can't come is not an option to further their education, right? That locks them out of the system. So I think for me, thinking about policies that bring families back to the fore, adolescent oftentimes is not coming because there is some crisis in their environment. And sometimes, delinquency can exist. And so there can be young people who are engaging in behaviors that are not ideal for their development. But oftentimes, even in those contexts, those young people can be provided with structure and support to get back on track, particularly if you catch it early enough. So I think my thought is to think about, in other countries, they use less punitive strategies to really refocus and reframe people away from delinquency, away from even criminal behavior as adults. It's much more holistic and thoughtful in its approach. I think it's particularly a challenge for African-American young people and Latino youth who may really face discrimination as it relates to the meeting out of those outcomes. And so I think thinking about new strategies that really support holistic development of youth, meeting where they are. There are also some strategies around allowing people to have sort of restitution without those penalties that really can shape them at this critical stage in adolescence. But I think if we just take young people and put them away or continue to punish them without giving them an opportunity to succeed, or to re-enter into a way, even if they have been put in a place or have been punished, how can they come away from that and then could still contribute in a meaningful way without carrying this backpack of shame or embarrassment or past, really, that they can move through into adulthood? And I think that the policymakers have to think about what are the options around that. And some of that takes money. And so I would say allocation of resources to do that, I think, are critically important. I think the final piece is that oftentimes there are parents who have mental illness or other challenges that they face, and young people often engage are maybe less supervised or have other competing demands from their communities in order to be a part. And I think that we also have to rethink what community looks like so that there can be healthy alternatives to some of the decisions and the options that young people have as a critical piece of creating that holistic environment for them to grow up in, even in some of our most challenged neighborhoods.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. We're going to go on to the next question because it kind of ties into that. And this is for all panelists. And I guess we're going to try to do the raise your hand if you want to jump in on it. According to the U.S. Surgeon General, there is a youth mental health crisis in our country. And research has shown that social media is a significant factor in that. So how can parents and educators determine developmentally appropriate uses of technology for children? And then how do you recommend they set and enforce those boundaries? So who'd like to?
Yeah, I like to start. I think it first starts with how early children are introduced to technology, or not necessarily introduced, have access to it. I think if you look from 1970 to now, where a child may have 4 hours of exposure to TV back then, and now they may consume about 8 hours, that's a significant amount. And so I would say for parents, particularly, look at when it is appropriate for children to have access. You can go to a grocery store and you can see an infant with a phone in their hand. And it's such a critical time because of brain development, that it just rewires the brain. And even when you think about access to things like iPads, I think the recommendation at one time was children shouldn't have access to iPads until about the age of 6 years old. It may have changed then, but I'm telling you, the rewiring of the brain and the addictive quality of social media makes it really concerning. One of the things I say is you really have to watch TV with your children. If there is social media, if you feel that it is appropriate, give them a particular amount of time. I also say, like, boredom is a gift. Give your child the gift of boredom, because what does boredom do? It gives your brain the time to rest. It gives you the opportunity to be creative, to use those empty paper towel rolls to create something, but if you consistently supplement your boredom with social media or with access to electronics, there's no rest for the brain. And that makes it more.
Let me let somebody else jump in
Yes,
here. We have our early childhood. Cindy, go ahead,
Uh-huh.
because I know you've got the very young ones that you work with. So
Yes, and I wholeheartedly agree with those findings, and personally feel that we may have reached a critical pain point in our history. And I feel that soon, if we're not careful, we may be unable to correct some of the damage that has already been done, because we are seeing so many children at very young ages addicted to social media and technology, who now rely more on their virtual friends instead of the human ones that you and I may have been accustomed to playing outdoors with when we were children. And these virtual pals could be friends who, unfortunately, our kids have never met before, who may not even exist in the manner that they present themselves, and who may pose a real safety threat to those who are most vulnerable. And I truly believe that we as adults have a responsibility to protect them from the dangers out there. I love what you said about finding boredom, because that is always is something that I recommend to families. And we call that finding a state of flow. So you think about, as an adult, where your mind goes when you dive into a book and you get immersed in the storyline, and you don't even pay attention to anything around you. Children need to find that state of flow more often than they're finding right now, because they don't know what it is to just stay with a project for long periods of time. Legos are a great activity to find that state of flow. Reading, jewelry making, all of those experiences, we need to find more opportunities for our children.
Maria, do you want to
And
jump
I'm
in
sorry,
with it?
I'd also suggest audible books where you are listening, for content and context and all of those things. Yeah.
I might say that parents, before we decide to come up with a plan for our young person's social media, that we examine our own social media behavior,
right.
and our own cell phone use behavior. So if we're sitting at the dinner table with our cell phone, and we're looking at it while our young person is trying to tell us about their day, regardless of how old they are, then I think that presents a real challenge related to modeling. And so that I think that we have to begin to disconnect and reconnect with our young people in different ways. I think for our family, sports has just been a really important way for us to do that. It's great from a mental health perspective because it allows young people to get those endorphins flowing. It's nothing like exhaustion for a good night's sleep and a hearty eating meal, and for them to really forget about those things. There's also opportunities to work with a team and other people and have holistic relationships with peers and safe adults in the community, and to really develop themselves as stronger physically as well. I think I'm fortunate to have two student athletes, and that's something that's critical part of their identity. I don't know that people have to go to that extreme, but it's a lot of family time together, and I think that's the thing. My old mom was a ballet mom. That was her thing, and we all did that, and it just connects you in a really different sort of way. So I would assert that if one is going to ask their young person to move away from social media use, that in addition to the boredom, that there are other things that they can also, because the boredom leads to art and other kinds of things, but that there are ways for them to actually engage in positive, healthy relationships with peers and other adults, coaches, other parents in the community. And I think that has been critically important, certainly for my children who have gone through grief, but certainly important to know that there are other adults who care about them, who are invested in their development. It's really been very important. And that can be through theater at school or the orchestra. There are other ways that parents can do that as well that we've also used. And I just think it's those investments. Sometimes they cost money. And so thinking about ways that Parks and Rec and the schools, what the school offers to young people in terms of music and sports and theater, I think are critically important. And I think that it's a thing that allows young people to find out who they are. And I think that's the thing we missed during COVID. We took all of that away from them. And so I'm careful about the technology piece, because almost all of school is online outside of school now. All of their homework is online. They're not books or papers as much anymore. So adults are also asking them to spend more time online. So if we can think of other creative ways and make those investments when we can, to allow them to grow in other spaces, I think it's good for their mental health and their physical health.
Thank you for that. And of course, there's AI now that we have to contend with as well. And adults have to figure out how to navigate it, because the kids are always ahead of us. We've talked a little bit about parents and caregivers, and we have about 5 minutes until our 1 o'clock break. So we're going to be succinct with this, but this is for any of our panelists. How can parents and caregivers demonstrate and bring emotional stability to their parenting, their caregiving? And why does that matter? Who wants to jump in on that?
I think that one of the
Go ahead, Maria, go ahead.
I have learned more so lately than others that the one thing that young people need to know is that the person who is managing their life is okay. And I think the way to provide stability is to be okay. And I think in certain situations, that means that if you are facing a crisis, you got to get help to self-manage your crisis. I love, every time I'm on the airplane and the person says, if you're traveling with a small child and, something happens, oxygen mask will drop down from the ceiling and you've got to put yours on first. I say it to patient families all the time. Some of them have never flown, which is tricky. But as parents, we've got to put our oxygen mask on first. We've got to make sure our emotional regulation and our emotional control is intact. Sometimes it's okay to say to an adolescent, they might say, well, why are you upset? Well, I'm sad too, your dad's my person. And you can articulate that in a thoughtful way. But the bottom line is, I had one of my uncles who's Nigerian call me and he said, Maria, do not let the children see you cry, and it's interesting though. Because I think that I had to self-manage in a really thoughtful way. Even as like at work, you have to self-manage so that I can keep, if I'm the leader of a team, I have to take care of myself in a different space so that I can continue to be the person that they know is going to provide a safe environment for them. And I think that being, maybe seem like being strong, but I think sometimes, especially some moms who may be doing it by themselves, you don't have a backup person to come in and say, I'm gonna be strong today. I got it, right? That you have to figure out a way to take care of yourself, to manage your emotions, to manage how you're communicating to your young people. And even if even if it's not a small child, it drops down for an adolescent. You got to put yours on for an adolescent. You may need a little extra oxygen so that you can self-manage sometimes. So I think it's really important to self-care, take care of yourself.
Okay, Cindi, go ahead.
Yes, I'll just quickly share. I agree completely with what she just shared. I would also add that it is so important for us as parents to be both physically and emotionally present and in the moment, because our kids are watching us like hawks. And I just wanted to share a little story that was a teachable moment for me. And that was when my children were about 7 or 8. They were attending my school. We lived in another state. And after school, they would come to my office. I would have toys on the floor for them to play with while I finished up my work. And then we would head home for dinner, bath, and bed. And that was our nightly routine because I was just swamped at work and was trying to be a good parent at the same time. So I was physically present with my children. But one afternoon, we drove home and pulled into the driveway. And my second or third grade son behind me said, before we got out of the car, Mom, why don't you smile at home the way you do at work? And it was like a knife just going through my heart because I realized in that moment, I am physically with my children. I pick them up and they're in my office with me from 3 to 5 until we get home. And then at home, we go through all the routines, but I am not emotionally there. And for him to notice at such a young age that my presence looked very different. At home, I was in go mode. We've got to get from dinner to bed. And it was just, that was a very teachable moment for me. So I would say, in addition to being physically present, we definitely need to be emotionally present.
Okay, and that's the note we're going to pause on for our 1 o'clock break. We're right there. We're going to take 3 minutes. We're going to look at what questions are in the chat, and then we're going to come back. So you want to turn your camera off for a moment, that's fine. Take a break, go get some water, and we will be back. All right, I think we're right there at 103 in our Zen music that has us feeling better. My green screen is showing for whatever, but we're going to just jump into the questions. We really have a substantive one for, I'm going to say maybe Cindi, because it's about a 4-year-old, but if any of you all want to jump in, please do. Hi, I'm the mother of 4 and have a child with developmental delays, a boy who's 8. My concern is how those delays interfere with our everyday life as a family. I see that he's not able to fully comprehend his feelings, and that puts a strain on us as a unit. His siblings struggle to comprehend it, and there are not many places for us to turn for help. Are there recommendations on how we can proceed as parents on his behalf and as a unit? Thank you. Thoughts?
Sure, happy to respond to that. And thank you for asking that question. As a parent of a child who also has special needs, I have been through that journey and know exactly how you're feeling. My first recommendation would be to seek out the mental health resources in your particular town or area, because we found as parents that they can be extremely, extremely helpful, whether that is in-home intensive care, whether it's outside therapists, whether it's hospitals. Children's Hospital, I know, is an amazing resources that we have found to be useful. I also found, though, that it's very helpful to make sure that those family members in your home knows that each of us are unique and different and beautifully built, and that we each come with our strengths and lesser strengths, and that we're all working on something. And so that if we can create that conversation within our home, it just becomes the norm, and it helps them be more tolerant of other behaviors that they might see in school, later on in the workforce, and in life in general.
Anybody else want to jump in on that one, or we want to move to the next one? Okay, Dr. Trent, Maria, a couple of people have asked for the book title that you mentioned, the book that you read to your children, your daughter when she was younger. So if you can let us know what that title is.
It was called Where Do I Come From? I can put a link to it in the chat. I have no relationship with these individuals.
Okay.
The reason I loved it is it also, you can get the book and the people are different hues. And I think that is so, identity development is so important to this particular use of to all youth, but when you never see your image in the books, it's important. So I was able to personalize it by getting an African-American young person changing. So I'll put it in the.
Okay, here's another question. Thank you for that. An entirely new kind of parenting education that reaches everyone, everywhere, could be an extraordinarily powerful kind of primary prevention. Should public health authorities be developing this new kind of parenting education? And if you think the answer is yes, what would it look like? What would that parenting education look like? Who wants to try to jump in on that one? Yes? Thinking's good, but basically we're talking, it sounds like they're saying, how can we do parenting education more broadly with a public health kind of lens?
Well, I can speak from an adolescent perspective. There are some very specific, tangible things that are happening during adolescence. And I think that I do think that partnerships with schools are critically important. Having worked to try to bring a high school to our community over the last year, it becomes a real source of support. It doesn't always have to be done by the teachers at the school, but the school could be a safe place for parents to congregate to get that information. But what I have found is that not all parents are aligned in what education young people should get, and that's very locally driven. So I think that what I might say is that, first of all, parents, it'd be great for parents to work with their school organizations as part of the PTA. Like oftentimes, a lot of parents, some parents in some communities, they don't come to those meetings and have a voice and a say. And I think that's important for the school to feel supported, that parents want that from them. So I would say that piece, but I think that there's some very specific topics ranging from bodily autonomy, consent, substance use. I love it. I live in Howard County. Many of these things are taught in school. Fiscal accountability. One of the courses that was integrated into the math course was around investing in stocks. So I think that there is a combination of life skills and other things that kids can be taught, but really involving the parents in that process around how they can help their young people, I think is critically important. I think the school can be just a critical place for that to occur, because your kid spends most of their day there. And so that partnership, I think, is important. So
I was going to say that schools are in unique positions to be able to teach, to support families around strategies for parenting. And particularly, their teachers have a lot of information, particularly for whatever grade band they're teaching. But again, like Dr. Trent was saying, these things are often happening in schools. And oftentimes there may be 1, 2, or 3 parents that may show. So it does require effort. I continue to say it, that parenting is hard work. It will require something of you. And so see what your school is offering. See, at DCPS, there is a school social worker in every building. Oftentimes they are the leads in facilitating these types of support, and they often do it in group, by the way of group presentations. But I am sure there are many clinicians that are happy to sit down with families to talk about whatever the presenting issue is for your family, for your child, and to create, a plan of support to help you just to be able to address those particular issues as they come.
I think that may have been addressed at the previous question of the mom with the 8-year-old and the 4 kids. But in terms of a public health approach to parenting, I would love to see that again. It's a challenge. There are great now more coaching programs. There's the positive parenting program. There are efforts out there. How available and widespread they are, that's the challenge. And that's why we're doing this webinar today. Here's a question for the younger set. What would your advice be to foster a love of reading in children, first graders specifically, while also allowing them to watch TV? What is your opinion on letting them watch TV by themselves, and how much time per day? So Cindi, I know you specialize in this age group because Beauvoir goes up to 3rd grade. So do you want to tackle that one? Love of reading and TV.
Yes, well, that's an interesting combination, but I will try and tackle both of those because I think both have important things that we need to remember. The best way to influence a love of reading is to both read to your child and have them read and expose them to as wide a range of rich literature as possible, making sure that there is diversity in topics, in people, and concepts, as nonfiction, genres, fiction, nonfiction, all of the above, to make sure that that's included in your child's library at home. And depending on how your family feels about TV, I would closely monitor what your child is watching at that age, 6 in particular, because that is such an impressionable young age. And those are the years when they start to build what we call those habits. And we want their habits to be ones that are in line with your beliefs as a parent. And so in our home, we had very strict rules, for instance, about when you could start watching TV or when you could start playing your computer games. Because what we found is, one, our children would wake up super early at the crack of dawn at 5 because they wanted to get to their computers, and they would try to stay on them all day. And so we would have a rule of thumb: when you wake up in the morning, we want you to spend the first 2 hours reading, playing card games, or doing something interesting. When it's time for to play computers or watch TV, you have this amount of time to watch it, and then it goes off, and you have to spend this amount of time doing something else before you return to the TV again. If we found, and this was when our children were older, that computers were becoming a challenge for our son in particular, we noticed that his personality was changing. He was more prickly. He would bite back with comments. He was just ornery in general. And we would use language, and you're free to borrow this. I don't like the person you become when you're playing computer in this way. So we're going to take it away for a few hours. You can do the same thing with the television. Children are always prone to saying, well, my friend so-and-so gets to do this. Another message that you might want to sort of tuck away in your pocket is very simple. In our family, we choose to do things this way, and we believe that this leads to a healthy family lifestyle. So keep those messages ready, because you're going to use them often, but stick to what your beliefs are as a family, and don't stray from them.
Yeah, and I would also add, and I'd say, and I know this is a different time. My children are 26 and 24, but my children during the weekday, they were not allowed to watch TV. We came home, we made play a game as a family. You do your homework and those things. On Friday afternoon, it was the weekend, and that was what the weekend was for. The weekend was for enjoying yourself. Also, when you watch TV, or if you allow your children to watch TV with them. Like, you are responsible for the values that you want your children to internalize. And oftentimes, by sitting with them, it is a great opportunity to say, I wonder why they would consider doing that. You can ask particular questions that will help them build a consciousness as it relates to what they're seeing. And so, very similar to Dr. Trent, my children are athletes too. They were exhausted, but even the times when they weren't, they knew that their go-to was not television, telephone, or any other electronic devices. But again, as I continue to say, parenting is work. It requires something of you. That means that you can't watch TV during the week. For our family, that meant that we weren't watching TV during the week either, because TV was for weekends.
Thanks for that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, what I hear is presence, and I hear actually in some ways being counterculture, which when we do stewards of children training, we talk about how making those boundaries, putting those limits in place. Everybody else might be not doing them, but this is what you're doing with your child. Okay, we have a question. At what age should we introduce sex education and start that conversation?
Well, I think in terms of the body and education, I think it starts really early by accurately being able to, you all know this, you all teach this at
Name your body parts. I know,
right?
this is stewards of children.
You all teach this at Safe Shores, right? Being able to, name your body parts. But I think the idea of sex and not actual, you think about the age of 6 to 8 when children are starting to see people who are, expecting. I think that's a great way to talk about sex, but, and Dr. Trent, you may jump in a little bit about talking about sex, in adolescence, but definitely, I think it starts with being aware of your body.
Right, and having
And
the right names.
Having the right names,
Yes.
that's
body
correct.
parts.
Right? No cookies and, all
Pocketbooks,
of those things,
yeah.
that we often replace for anatomically correct language.
Right, because adults aren't comfortable with it. right?
Absolutely.
That's what happened.
I feel a presentation coming on, Michelle.
Other thoughts on this one?
I agree. I think there's also some fantastic books for young children that parents can read with their children. We found as our children were getting older, not only reading with them, but once we read through them with them, leaving them for them to sort of leaf through on their own so that they could come up with more questions when they were ready, was just, it really helped our children, one, become comfortable with their bodies and understand, good touch versus bad touch, who to talk to if there's a concern, and what is happening to my body as I'm getting older in a very natural, not taboo way.
And also monitoring our responses, to their questions. If you are clutching your chest, kids seem to think, okay, that's off limits. Where else can I get this information? And so really monitoring the way you embrace, questions about the topic.
Yeah.
I do think parents get afraid as their young people get older. Most girls, the average age of menarche in the United States is 12 and a half. It's not a high school thing. It's not a middle school thing. It's an elementary school thing. And so we have to begin preparing young people. I agree very early, but then the conversations have to be not necessarily frequent, but certainly ongoing as they move through. I will say one of the things I didn't say about the public health of parenting support and for young people is, a problem we have is that people are not taking their young people for their primary care visits. And so I think I really value that time with the individual young person and the parents to figure out what the issues are, what the things they're struggling with. I oftentimes will ask the young person in front of their parent before talking to them alone. So tell me what your mom has talked to you, if it's girl, about your periods and sex. What have you, this is 12-year-old visit. What have you all talked about? I do warn them that I will say, you all go and have lunch and talk about it and then come back and see me if you need me to help you or I can answer any questions. I'm a safe person. But I think it's important too that then we leave the person with an adolescent doctor, somebody like me, to have those confidential discussions with them about questions that they have. We are safe resources and our job to figure it out. We don't necessarily keep secrets, but I think that at some point around 11 or 12, there are things that adolescents really need some confidentiality around. And what we've learned is if they don't get that, then they will forego care. The reason I push adolescent medicine a little bit is because there's been a study of kids in primary care. It was done out of the University of North Carolina. They really demonstrate in primary care settings that providers are really talking to young people for about 36 seconds about sexuality and sexual behavior. And so as parents, I think we really have to say, I would like for you to talk to my young person about this today, be proactive, spend time with them. I can step out, I'll come back in and let me know where I need to pick up, but it should be a partnership between the parents, the provider to support the adolescent, expecting more autonomy for the adolescent as they move forward. So I think that these conversations are important very early. That's my way. I never ask people to do things I'm not willing to do. But I do think that the conversations become more pertinent. And I think that scares parents. And I think having those conversations about their fear and the things that they get in the way of, like family planning or immunization for HPV, those are like real things that the parents have to do to keep their young people safe.
Thank you. So our time is coming to an end. We want to really get whatever gems you want to drop on the way out of our Zoom session today. So here's the final question, and we're going to ask each of our panelists to respond to this. If there were 3 things that you could tell adults, grown-ups, that they absolutely need to know and or do to help children thrive, what would those 3 things be? And you each have about 2.5 minutes. We're going to start with Cindi and then Taiya and then Maria.
Thanks. It's been my pleasure being here today. And the 3 things I guess I would love to share with you. One is a book that I neglected to share at the outset, but it helps families understand the ages and stages of their children And it's this book right here. It's called Yardsticks, Child and Adolescent Development Ages 4 through 14. And this has been like a mainstay on the bookshelves of all of our teachers here at Beauvoir. We are always recommending it to parents because you're able to leaf through it. And if you're seeing something questionable in your child's behavior, you're able to look through the book and say, well, this is normal behavior at this age, or it may be something I want to bring to my pediatrician. So that's number one. The second one, I also have a visual for it. Allow our kids to make mistakes or mistakes. This hangs on my door at school because we want our children to realize that making mistakes and having those teachable moments are a natural part of the brain growth experience. When we make mistakes, our brain grows because we learn something new. And so as adults, we need to encourage our children, one, not only to make mistakes, but three, the last thing I will share is to allow them to experience disappointment, because resilience and learning how to bounce back from upset is also a critical part of the growth process for children. And when I mention those three things, they're not necessarily in that order, but those definitely would be the three things that I would recommend as takeaways for our attendees today.
Thank you for that. And thank you for the books. Great. Taiya.
I think the first one I would start with is to remind parents that they are often the protective factor for their children. And, you know, it really does take a loving, supportive environment, not a perfect one, but a loving one, and a supportive one, and one where children can feel safe to communicate without judgment, with maybe with some correction, but not necessarily with judgment. Also, one of the other ones I'd like to share is that utilize your school as a resource. Utilize your school as a resource. They are trained professionals, you know, and they spend a lot of time with your children. And so I saw the question about challenges with, you know, working through a particular curriculum. You know, reach out to teachers, reach out to clinicians. You know, schools are looking for ways to partner with parents. And so be vocal about what it is that you need, because I will tell you, if you need it, there are probably other parents who need that support too. And
Is that your three? Your first.
I'm sorry,
Got one?
was that my three?
Yeah.
Go ahead. That was my three.
Okay. Okay.
Go ahead.
All right, Maria, three things if you could tell parents or caregivers that they need to do to help kids thrive.
One, these are three within one. Go to the well visit, go to the parent teacher conferences, go to the PTA meeting so the school knows who you are. Your presence is protective at all points. Okay, so that's what, go where you're supposed to go. Second thing is talk less and listen more. Sometimes you just need to drive the car, especially if you're driving a carpool, you're the sports mom today, you're taking them all out to eat. You learn about your kid, you learn about the kids your kid's hanging out with, you learn about what's important to them, what's hot, what's up topic. Be present, but you don't always have to interject. If there's something you want to interject on, wait till you get home. Don't embarrass your kid. Talk to him about it later. Try to bring it up in a way that doesn't make it like you were eavesdropping, even though that's what you were doing. Drive the car. The third thing is give them grace. I hear, I think I often use this example of toddlers. We pick them up, they fall down, do it again, you can do it. I think we have to give teenagers that same kind of grace. They're big things that they're doing. And we have to provide boundaries and support and resources and structure for them as well. Hug them. They need all the things that they needed when they were 3. It just looks and feels a little different. So I just encourage us to give young people, especially adolescents and emerging adults, a ton of grace. Forgive them, be kind, accept their apologies when they give them, and then move forward. I think that that's really important. That says to a young person, my parent, my guardian, my caretaker, my grandma, y'all are safe people for me because I can mess up and you'll still love me. So I'll leave it there.
And Michelle, since I didn't really get my third one, I'm going to go ahead and say, give yourself grace too. This is a hard job and no one is perfect. So give yourself some grace. You know, you get to dust yourself off, you know, and try again too. So yeah.
Yeah, and keep learning. I think that's one of the key things too, is that it doesn't stop. Parents and caregivers have to keep learning, and that's why we're doing this today. Thank you so much, Cindi Gibbs-Wilborn, Taiya Gregory, and Maria Trent, for sharing your wisdom, knowledge, expertise, and your personal vignettes as well about things that you've learned along your parenting journey. Thank you everyone for tuning into the webinar and taking time to prioritize children. I hope you found the conversation rich and thought-provoking and nutritious, and that you feel free to share some love in the chat for our panelists. At Safe Shores, we hope that when adults know better, we do better. And we believe that helping adults protect and be gentle with children will yield a safer and more gentle world. So once again, to learn more about Safe Shores, to sign up for some of the trainings, to get some of the learning that we've discussed, please visit our website, safeshores.org. Follow us on Instagram or LinkedIn at Safe Shores DC. And while April is designated as Child Abuse Prevention Month, we know preventing child abuse and prioritizing children is what's needed from adults every day, every month of every year. So what we do or don't do for children today impacts all of us today, tomorrow, and the tomorrows after that. So thank you again for making time to prioritize kids by being part of this conversation. This is the way we're going to build a hopeful future for children together, in community, learning together, supporting each other. And that's it. Thank you for being with us. And we're releasing you to the rest of your day. Be well.